Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Yasmeen Abdeen, and I'm very happy to see you all here. It tells me you all have one common interest: how energy efficiency helps fight climate change. Before I get too excited and start talking about our campaign, let me introduce myself. I'm an energy engineering student from Jordan, currently collecting valuable experience at ILF Consulting Engineers in Munich. The driving force that has got me to this point in my life is how I can impact the world. My story with the Association of Energy Engineers, AE, started at my first year university, when I was lucky to be part of a group of wonderful people who established an AE student chapter at the German Jordanian University. Mr. Samer Zawaide, now the current president of AE, had a direct influence on my journey. He demonstrated to me how the AE community connects energy engineers who share a vision for improving the world and have the skills and knowledge to make change happen. Today, this campaign aims to celebrate individuals involved in energy efficiency, sustainability, and the impact their efforts make to negate climate change. We have 5 such individuals here with us today. They'll share their experiences and stories. I'm sure we'll get some insights into how small changes can make a big impact. Before I introduce the speakers, I'd like to give you a little background information. In the towns and cities where we live and work, the buildings offer a massive opportunity to find and reduce energy waste and become more energy efficient. Are you aware that in 2020, the global building stock is approximately 250 billion square meters? That's hard to comprehend. To put that in perspective, that is almost equivalent to the landmass of the United Kingdom. It is also expected to double by 2060. The buildings and building construction sectors combined are responsible for over 1/3 of the global final energy consumption and nearly 40% of the total emissions that increase the rate of climate change. Energy efficiency is one of the fastest and most economical ways to reduce these emissions and dramatically help fight against climate change. And that's where energy engineers come in. An energy engineer's job is to reduce that consumption or apply sustainable methods for obtaining the same results. They create shortcuts that can help solve the problem. Energy efficiency primarily reduces the demand and use of valuable resources, improves sustainability, and for many businesses, it can be a source of cost reduction. Almost every area of our lives can be improved by becoming more energy efficient. Being energy efficient is not about restriction, but about becoming smarter. Therefore, it empowers, instigates behavioral change for the better. It also helps improve productivity, drives technological innovation, creates jobs, and stimulates economic growth. Our speakers are all working in the industry to improve energy efficiency and sustainability. Yes, they have saved firms money, but more importantly, they help create healthier living and working environments, reduce energy poverty, and help build a more sustainable energy future. Today, our speakers are Ian Boylan, who will focus on the global community of energy engineers, Brian Bomer, who will talk about his experience transforming buildings, Joanne Dean will share her experiences on carbon reduction, Vanessa McGrath will bring us renewable and alternative energy, and lastly, Mike Dietrich will cover sustainable development. So, to our first speaker. Today, we are pleased to welcome a very special guest from Ireland, a Chief Executive Officer at ISO Baseline, a member of the Strategic Advisory Board of EVO, and a member of Board Directors and former president of the largest professional body of energy professionals and the only truly global energy professionals organization, AE. So please help me welcome Mr. Ian Boylan to talk about enabling the global community.
Hi, thank you, Yasmeen. So just I'm going to give you a bit of a talk about myself. As Yasmeen said, Baseline is one of 2 businesses that I work out of. One is Target Energy, the other is Baseline. I'll give a quick introduction to them in a minute. I'm a board member of AEE and a past president of the association. I'm a committee member of ISO TC 301, which is the committee that writes the energy management standards for ISO, the International Standards Organization. I am a member of the Strategic Advisory Board of EVO, the Efficiency Evaluation Organization, which is the organization that orders the International Performance Measurement and Verification Protocol, and I'm a member of AE's Global Guidance Committee. So sort of along with some of that, I get to do some work from time to time in energy management and climate change. To give you a sort of a background, some of the pictures there will give it my background. Originally was with the military. I spent 21 years with the Irish Navy. I did in my time a lot of offshore yacht racing. That's a picture of myself doing around Ireland about 15 years ago. And in my younger days, I was a keen windsurfer. So that will give you a sort of a background of my interest in climate. It sort of had a keen impact in everything that I did in all of those days. Okay. So in my education background, I'm an electrical engineer. I did a degree in electrical engineering and a master's in sustainable energy back in the days when energy wasn't the front page of the newspaper. It was more of a back page of the newspaper, as I was in the middle of my master's degree when the Russians turned off the gas into the Ukraine the first time around. So one of the things that energy engineering gave me a realization, especially working with the Navy, is that we don't manage energy or manage climate. We manage systems and we manage people. And it's those people and those systems have an impact on the climate, on the emissions. And it's something that it's always stuck to me and sort of in the work that I do. Upon leaving the Defence Forces, I went working with an energy consultancy called Air Data, and from that went on to start my own company. Okay. So we move on. So the company, one of the companies that I have is Target Energy. It's a consultancy company, consultancy and training company. So it helps people identify opportunities to improve climate. I run training on behalf of the Association of Energy Engineers and others, and I audit companies against the requirements of the international standard ISO 50001 to help them improve their own structures. So, next slide. So in terms of how it impacts on climate change, through the training and the consultancy things that I do, one of the things I tend to say quite a lot is you cannot manage what you don't understand. We need to improve things to deliver. We need to change to improve things. So improvement means change all the time. So our focus, or my focus in my business, is improving the understanding of individuals that allow those individuals to then improve the climate, improve their energy efficiency, and in turn, improve the carbon impact on the world. Okay. And I suppose one of the messages I would always try to ensure that people get from in relation to climate change is climate change can be positive to us from a money perspective. A lot of times people see climate impact as being something that makes us to do things bad, to make the world less comfortable, make the jobs we do more difficult to do, and that's couldn't be further than the truth. The other business that I have is a startup company which focuses on software tools for the energy management sector to help people do their job, and it's a lot of work around ISO 50001 in that area. So next slide, please. So again, the message behind this is systems and structures should assist an energy manager in the work that they do. It shouldn't make things more difficult for them to do. So energy efficiency and climate change going hand in hand, but trying to do it in a structured manner. We try to manage the other resources of our business. So energy is just another resource to manage. Next slide, please. So just talking about energy engineering as a global career. So I was asked to give a sort of an oversight from the global side of energy engineering. And like I worked in approximately 18 countries over 4 continents in the areas of energy, auditing, delivering training, developing management systems, and ultimately identifying opportunities to work with to improve the climate. Okay, next slide, please. A sample to give you a flavor of the areas that I worked in. The clients are on the left-hand side. So a lot of the pharmaceutical clients are the companies that are engaged at the moment in developing the vaccines for COVID-19. And on the right-hand side, you see the countries, so going anywhere from Ireland, New Zealand, Saudi Arabia. So it shows how global the energy engineering community can be. Next slide. So I think in selling the message, and one of the areas, I think I touched on it briefly there earlier in terms of, you see, especially in some countries in the world now where they try to equate the work that we try to do to improve climate and to reduce climate change as being something negative. So one of the areas that I always try to focus on within my business and the way that I work is you're not always focusing on selling climate change or selling climate impact directly. You're selling the message in different ways to, I suppose it's finding out what works with different clients. So sometimes improvement is sold on climate impact. Other times it's sold on cost improvements. Other times it's sold on product quality improvements. Other times it's sold on benefit. So the focus from my perspective is to find what will sell, what will get people to effect change and focus on that. It's what's in it for me is a very keen message to try to identify what it is for that individual, that what is the button that you can push on that individual to get them to effect change. You can't do it for them, but you have to try and move them along the way. So focusing on the co-benefits of climate change to me is one of the big things. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so AEE is a global family. So in terms of, I joined AEE directly after doing my Certified Energy Manager training. And I suppose one of the things that I tend to say to people, I went to what was WEC, World Energy Engineering Congress, for the first time. It's now called AEE World. And the only I suppose the only disappointment that I have about that was that it took me 4 years to go to my first one. And I went to the first one, and when I arrived home on the plane back to Ireland, I suddenly realized when I tried to book my flight for the next WEC that you could only book flights 180 days in advance. So it's definitely been the one thing on my calendar that's set well in advance. The one difference I would see about AEE as an organization in comparison to the other organizations that I'm part of is that it really is a global family, that you get to meet people and they take a real strong interest in you as an individual. And it's really something that I've always found really encouraging. And that's how I've been come part of the organization. So next slide. And this is just a sort of a quick picture to show the global nature. This is a picture that's taken at AEE World last year. And if you look across, there must be 50 countries represented in that group of people for AEE as a global organization affecting climate change throughout the world. Okay, so I'll hand back to Yasmeen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ian Boylan, for your exciting presentation. I can't agree more with what you said. Fighting climate change is not about making our lives more difficult or less comfortable, but the opposite, in fact. Our next speaker is the Sustainability, Energy, and Mechanical Manager for the Department of Permitting Services in Montgomery County, Maryland, which covers 500 square miles with a population of approximately 1 million residents. His many accomplishments range from code adoption, customized marketing, net zero program creation, data analytics, rating system development, public speaking, and community involvement. He will be sharing his professional experience in transforming buildings. Please help me welcome the Green Building Guru, Mr. Brian Bomer.
Oh, happy Friday, everybody. Thanks for coming out. Great introduction, appreciate that. So Montgomery County, Maryland, it's just northwest of Washington, D.C. As mentioned, it's 1,300 square kilometers for our international folks, with a population of 1.1 million people. Many people associate this area with Washington, D.C. So two of the things that I can talk about today that are in my day-to-day activities is the International Green Construction Code and Building Energy Performance Standard. I earned my CEM about 8 years ago while working for a publicly owned electric utility in Central Texas, and have worked in the public sector for over 15 years now, and have found this to be a very valuable asset, and have met a lot of wonderful people through this process and through this organization. Next slide, please. So, a common chart that we see nationally and internationally, our greenhouse gas inventory. So we're about 50% of our greenhouse gas emissions in the building sector within Montgomery County. This is fairly common throughout the United States. And so I'm proud to be part of the revolution to reduce greenhouse gas and work through energy efficiency, or use energy efficiency as that method. Next slide, please. So our building codes break buildings really into two sectors. That's residential and commercial. Our construction methodologies, once again, the codes, like the energy code, are broken into these two building typologies. And then once you're in these two building typologies, we really have new construction and we have existing building stock, and each of them present unique challenges and opportunities. So the sort of the low-hanging fruit, what is easiest for us to impact is new commercial and new residential. For new commercial, we focus on the International Green Construction Code and the IECC, the International Energy Conservation Code. We are also exploring additional overlay codes such as Zero Code and Appendix ZE to continue to drive down efficiency and to really make that connection between the built environment and our pathway to greenhouse gas reduction through net zero energy buildings. So we feel very confident that we're on a good trajectory for both new commercial and new residential. It's the existing buildings that pose the biggest challenge, but I think one of the greatest opportunities for AEE people to be involved with as we see jurisdictions bring on new policies. Next slide, please. So quickly, we'll talk about the IGCC, the International Green Construction Code. We are about to adopt the 2018 version, which we are one of few municipalities in the United States to do so. Some of the notable energy elements within the IGCC is that there are on-site renewable generation requirements within the code. And one of the amendments that we made was to make sure that any of these on-site, if a building is unable to generate renewable energy on-site, they get to go to off-site procurement. We required that procurement to be within our region to help us with our larger goals as a jurisdiction. We've also introduced what is called the ZEPI score. So that's Zero Energy Performance Index. It is a target you use through an energy modeling methodology to continually ratchet down performance over a period of years. Right now, we're proposing a ZEPI score of 40. Our current green code is at 50. So you can see that each code iteration, we intend to lower it about 10 points with the goal of 0 in that 2035 window. And this is a very energy-centric conversation, but it is important to understand that the IGCC is a holistic code that looks at water savings, material resources, indoor air quality, and so on and so forth. So it's really a building design improvement tool. Some of the other things, in both the IECC and the IGCC, I think it's important for folks in this presentation to know that commissioning is a big portion of this, and there's a lot of opportunities for AEE folks to get involved in commissioning. And again, I mentioned some of the overlay codes, which also have components that AEE folks can get involved in. Next slide, please. So one of the things we do with our existing buildings is require benchmarking. So this is, again, common. And what this does is it mandates energy use verification on cycles. We collect that data. Next slide, please. And one of the things that we're working on is ratcheting down our benchmarking requirements. Right now, we don't really hit majority of the buildings within our jurisdiction. With our new proposal for the benchmarking law, we will expand out to about 80% of the building stock in Montgomery County. Next slide. And the intent of that is to use that data to help advance our building energy performance program. And so there are a few BEPS, Building Energy Performance Standard programs throughout the United States right now. And really what this does is it takes all buildings by sector and looks at best performing and worst performing and gets the worst performing projects on a trajectory to jump to the front of the line. And so this is a constantly revolving process. Buildings that are at the top of the list, it someday will be at the bottom of that list. And so the idea is that this is a cyclical process that continues to push forward energy efficiency and push us towards net zero. A great opportunity for AEE folks to become involved in these sort of policies. There's energy modeling, energy efficiency evaluation, implementation of energy efficiency, and monitoring of all these systems through commissioning and submetering. So a lot of great opportunities for people to be involved. If your jurisdiction, your city, your state, wherever you are, your country is having discussions around policies such as BEPS, I highly recommend you get involved and become an advocate for these programs. It will only help you in the long run. Next slide, please. And so these slides are available if we're sharing them. And so I put this in here just as a sort of supplementary data for everybody. I won't go through this, but it talks a little bit more about the BEPS legislation as we're moving it forward. One of the key takeaways here is that we are focusing on an advisory board to help us determine best methods moving forward for buildings, because we understand all buildings are not created equal. Next slide, please. And so to wrap up, here's my contact information. Again, I'm the Sustainability Energy Mechanical Manager, Department of Permitting Services, Montgomery County. Some of the things that I want to focus on is sort of regional collaboration. We are not going to get through this alone. And so to think that Montgomery County has all the solutions is wrong. And so here are some examples of other collaboration that I've determined to be of importance to our county, and looking at the state level, looking at our cities and our jurisdictions just next to us. So DC, for instance, has some great programs. And then last but not least, a shameless plug for the Net Zero Energy Coalition. This is a regional nonprofit organization of like-minded professionals that came together to push net zero in the region. So please visit our website and take a look at it. And that is 9 minutes. So I did my best. On to the next.
Thank you very much. It was really good. I agree. These global issues require stakeholder involvement, and AE members are often these leaders that can create this influence. And now I'm pleased to welcome a carbon reduction specialist, Executive Director at Energy Carbon Management. She's currently driving a 518 megawatt renewable energy project, mainly in South Africa and the Southern African Development Community. An engineer who's making a difference in the world. And today she will be sharing with us her expert opinion on decarbonization. Please help me welcome Ms. Joanne Dean from South Africa.
Hi, I'm going to say hi because I think we're across all the time zones. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I certainly hope that I'm not going to put you to sleep, that you say good night. So just hi to all the amazing attendees and to all my esteemed colleagues. I'm Jo Dean from South Africa. I've got my BA in mechanical plant process flow control, and then I converted to environmental sys, and then I've got my PR in Eng, and I specialize in CRM and carbon project reduction. I'm trained and qualified both in South Africa and then on long distance colleges in Illinois and across the world, but my roots will always remain South African. I'm very into all industry bodies, industry associations. So I'm a board member of SAFIA, which is the South African Photovoltaic Industry Association for South Africa. SAYISA, I'm a founding member and a board member and spokesperson, which is the Energy Storage Association. And I'm the vice chair of the South African Renewable Energy Council, which oversees all types of technologies, all walks. And then I'm also part of the South African Institute of Electrical Engineers and the founding member for the storage chapter. And then I sit on numerous energy and carbon committees with government. We have a lot of sort of spin-off and sector groups and on renewable energy, on storage, and on decarbonization and GHG targets. And all of this spills into what we would term or what we're driving for, which is the just energies transition for South Africa and Africa. I think it's a known fact that South Africa is, a big fossil fuel driven country, and the transition, as we've seen on global studies, is not that easy. It is an honor to be among such esteemed company, and this is a first in the climate change and space, and I think and I hope it's going to be one of many. AE is a formidable organization, and it's a privilege to be able to lean on colleagues with similar mindsets and interests. We've listened to the two previous speakers, and I'm in awe. And as we provide engineering-based solutions to global warming, but why is science and engineering-based approach such a pivot for the fight to arrest climate change? I'm going to reflect a little bit that many of the technological advances in the world have required engineers of different disciplines to invent and to implement them. In no discipline is this more true than in extractive industries and the industries that convert carbon-based fuels to electricity and steam, and in mobile combustions, planes, cars, etc. But the unrestricted exploitation of carbon fuels has not caught up with this planet, and it stands to reason that with the same engineering efforts that went into creating this problem, we're all sitting here now thinking, how are we going to find applied solutions to solving the problem? To be clear, the fight against global warming is a collaborative effort, and we need a multidisciplinary approach. But in the end result, we need to wean our world of carbon-based energy by proposing and implementing and building new alternatives to replace the old. If you had to look at this in a nutshell, we have got 10 to 20 years to re-engineer what has taken 100 or more than 200 years to create. Scary thought. I'm going to have to really pump it up. I started my energy career as an activist, but others are more competent than me in this space in creating the global awareness for the drive to net carbon neutrality. Activism has its place, but it doesn't provide the solutions. I resolved that I was not to be a lobbyist and definitely not a financier. So I will leave the green energy financing and fundraising to the specialists. But there is a very big gap in finding the solutions. And I knew that I could make a difference by practically advising on the hardcore engineering solutions that have a business benefit in implementing. And that's the tactic that we're taking in South Africa, because you have to show those triple bottom line returns if you're going to encourage anybody to start making the change to benefit and to lead up to ultimately an energy transition. South Africa is a crucible of conflicting interests and needs. We represent the third world that needs to be the support of the first world, because as you all know, we're a non-annex country, and I see the countries represented here on this are Annex 1 countries. We need the support of the first world to finance the just transition to a green economy. But at the same time, we have first world industries in South Africa that are world competitors in GHG emissions and in mitigation technologies. So my role in South Africa is to see how I can make a difference in initiatives that are engineering and science-led and that can make a quantum difference in South Africa's GHG inventory. Every day I ask myself, what could I do that will take carbon out of the atmosphere? And when I apply my effort and my time, what is going to make the difference? To start at times is like facing the deep blue sea, but then the urgency, the need, and innovation takes over. And this is the art of solution finding. The first imperative and call to action in advising and consulting is to the decision makers. You have to form the opinions of the leaders. You have to have the sticks and the carrots to get them to make the change, the world businesses, to join the top 100 of the world. The second is, and the most important, forms the basis of everything, is the measurement and reporting of GHG footprints. This baseline reporting creates the space where we then define the solutions within the energy engineering space on how would we reduce those footprints. The third is in supporting and promoting utility scale projects for energy transition and unlocking distributed generation and thus self-generation that also supports and filters and combines to the whole for the utility scale projects. The fourth is in developing engineering solutions that are adaptive to the prevailing regulatory situation. Political will is rife, and paralysis requires innovation to assist individuals to make the change, to create the pioneers or the proof of concepts that you can flag for others to follow suit. The fifth is putting the hard yards into actual design, modeling, and project management of tangible renewable energy projects that have the potential to set new standards. The sixth is carbon mitigation measures, sequestration, and harnessing support via RECs, CDMs, etc., to augment the financial reward. And lastly, the touchstone is converting renewable energy into baseload by way of innovative storage, energy efficiency solutions, battery solutions at prices that compete with carbon-intensive combustion. There's a common thread that runs through all of this. It is the end goal is carbon reduction and providing government, business, and the man in the street with the practical engineering-based solutions to carbon footprint reduction. And whilst I'm working immeasurable hours a week on my large-scale projects and government and business advisory body consultations, maybe the most important constituency is the family next door that want to buy a 100 kilowatt system because they care. And what about yourself? Have you made the change? Are you the example? I think there's a saying, the shoemaker's shoes are always broken. And being an energy engineer requires one to treat small projects with as much attention and respect as those of scale. Because after all, if all 50 million people in South Africa invested in 100 kilowatt of alternatives to carbon combustion, we would change South Africa in a heartbeat. The solutions are often complicated because here we have enormous social cost of an energy revolution. And just like COVID-19 and the lockdown, there has to be a balance between life and livelihood. As an engineer in the carbon reduction space, I remain humbled by the sacrifices business and ordinary men and women of our country are prepared to make to preserve the future of following generations. In turn, as energy engineers, we all have a common objective to save the world 1 ton of CO2e at a time. What will win the push, though, is collegiality between the activists, identifying the space, the lobbyists creating the legislations and the policies to enable decarbonization paths, and then it is up to us, Earth energy engineers, to craft the solutions, map them out, and most difficult task of all is to implement them and prove that they work. If we are to bridge the 100 years of damage in the 10 years identified, we need to become a global community that comprises acknowledgement base of sharing in the specialized areas of business, industry, government, and tackling challenge. Knowledge should be free and should be shared. The gentleman that spoke before me spoke about how one country cannot do its own. It takes a group of countries. Climate change is one of the greatest threats facing humankind today. It is not a problem we can put off or deal with when we have more time or we have more money. We all have a duty to act to stop the climate change getting worse. The actions we take now will determine what the world we live in will look like in 10, 20, and 50 years' time. And it's going to need huge efforts from all of us as individuals, governments, businesses, schools, organizations working together for a better climate, for a better future. We need to have a global agenda between us and to stop history repeating itself. Earth engineers are pivotal to this. In South Africa, I would like to leave you with a thought. We have a just transition to a low emission development. Climate action should be undertaken in a manner that safeguards and increases jobs, reduces inequality, and positively contributes to the well-being of common South Africans. Millions of people are employed in energy-intensive industries, which will need to undergo significant restructuring as less carbon-intensive practices. These new employment opportunities will require new skills and new areas of expertise, and it's these skills that we need to teach and to pass on. We could have employment and vulnerability assessments and sector job resilience plans, which will be key policy instruments to manage the transition of those employed in the carbon-intensive energy sectors into the low-carbon economy energy sectors. I leave you with this thought. We need to stand together and we need to push together and we need to share our knowledge together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Abdeen, for your inspiring presentation. We really should be the example and the change. We're very happy that you could make it today. Her region yesterday had a massive storm last night, and so it affected the network connection. Thank you again. Our next industry expert is the section leader for the Strategic Planning, Engagement, Climate and Sustainability team at the Jacobs Cities and Places Solutions, Australia and New Zealand. She leads her team in reinventing the way we build cities and places and in creating connected, resilient communities. She's passionate about projects and solutions that honor and regenerate our environment, and she spends a lot of time designing energy systems for rail transport. We will now listen to Ms. Vanessa McGrath on renewable and alternative energy. Due to the time difference, the presentation was recorded beforehand.
Hi everyone, I'm Vanessa and I'm here to talk about renewable and alternative energy systems. So as I'm based in Australia, I just wanted to start off by acknowledging the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders as the traditional custodians in the land upon which we meet, and I'm presenting today. I wanted to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge their spiritual connection to country. The Australian power network, like power systems around the world, is being transformed from a system dominated by large thermal power stations to a system including a multitude of power generation resources and technologies of various sizes. On the left, we can see our traditional grid with central systems and long, thin networks, especially here in Australia. Our energy comes from similar resources, so those large thermal power stations that are synchronized together and can shift according to the load that we're receiving. We're now seeing renewable energies join the market, and this means the grid is becoming more interconnected. We don't have the same control over the renewable energy systems and when they produce power, so we can't control when the sun shines or when the wind blows. So this means the system is not synchronized. We are also seeing customers are engaging with their electricity market in a different way. We're seeing retailers promising 100% renewable energy contracts and a lot of different things happening in the market. So this graph shows the prediction of how wind and solar are going to be changing the market in Australia. So we see that wind and solar are happening in 2020 up to 2023, increasing rapidly. We also see that because wind and solar aren't very predictable, they need to be paired with pumped hydro and batteries to smooth out those peaks and troughs. So we're seeing more pumped hydro and batteries joining the market in later 2020 and early 2030. So now we've talked about a national grid. What does this look like on a local scale? So I'm going to talk a bit about a case study from Monash University. So Monash University is the largest university in Australia. It has over 70,000 students per year and 150 buildings spread across 4 campuses. They are a significant energy consumer. Monash University was the first Australian university to commit to an energy reduction target of net zero by 2030. Net zero for Monash means that all their energy used on campus will come from renewable sources. This is a pretty ambitious goal for a university that still wants to grow in their number of students and has very energy intense buildings like science research buildings. For Monash, net zero emissions strategy encompasses the following pillars: energy efficiency measures, campus electrification, addressing residual emissions through offsets, deploying of on-site and off-site renewable energy, and a sustainable microgrid. Microgrids are a smart energy network where supply and demand are effectively controlled and managed to orchestrate distributed resources such as buildings, generation, storage, and electric vehicles. The microgrid maximizes the value of connected assets for both the microgrid participants and for the broader grid. The Monash microgrid incorporates 20 buildings, 1 megawatt solar PV, 1 megawatt battery storage, and 2 electric charging stations. We were recently involved in a project for Monash to develop their health precinct. We were designing the first building in that health precinct, which is called the Biomedical Learning Teaching Building, or BLTB, which reminds me a lot of a sandwich. This building was going to become the hub of the new Monash Health Science Precinct. If it was any other project, it would have just been a simple building project. But because we were working with Monash, they wanted us to think precinct-wide. So BLTB is becoming the future thermal hub for the medical precinct, which means that all the boilers and chillers need to be installed in this building to supply all the heating and cooling needs to all the future buildings in the precinct. Basically, it's a district heating and cooling system, which are quite common in Europe, but something very new to Australia. The building is also going to be the energy storage building for the microgrid. So within this building, we have installed a 1 megawatt hour battery storage system. There are a lot of different energy storage types in the market, and it can be quite challenging to pick the correct storage type. For this project, we selected a hybrid energy storage system that combines vanadium, redox flow, and lithium ion technology. It was the first ever hybrid storage system of its type that went online in the world. The lithium batteries are something that a lot of you have heard about. Think Tesla batteries. Vanadium redox flow batteries are a lot less common. We selected these batteries because they're scalable. You can add additional storage units and you have an unlimited capacity. So you can keep growing the capacity of your batteries based on how many storage units you have. They have a lifespan that's over 25 years, which is very impressive for a battery. They have an excellent ability to retain charge. They can remain fully charged for up to a year. They can also be fully discharged for a long period of time. And they don't mind being discharged 100%. So that's often one of those constraints that we have with battery systems, is they can't be discharged beyond, say, 80%. They can handle multiple cycles of being recharged and discharged. They have a low fire risk, and they can be recycled and repurposed at the end of their life. They do have some limitations. They have a very low energy density, which means they take up a very large amount of space. They have a slower response time than lithium-ion batteries, which is why we paired them with them. They also have a slightly lower efficiency than lithium-ion batteries at an 85% efficiency, while lithium ions are at a 95% efficiency. But overall, combining these two battery systems allowed us to create an energy storage system to meet Monash's microgrid needs. So my final thoughts: renewable energies are happening, and they're happening around the world, and they're changing the way our grids work and are designed. Storage will be part of that, whether it's pumped hydro or batteries like I spoke about today. But the big message is it will happen. It's not going to happen overnight, but it is happening. Thank you.
Here to talk to us about sustainable development is a lead accredited professional, a degreed environment scientist, adjunct professor, best-selling author, and award-winning producer. He has written legislative, school, municipal, and corporate policies and developed programs supporting sustainable development and resilience for the built environment. Also a member of AAE's board of directors, please help me welcome a change agent, Mr. Mike Dietrich from Washington.
So, yeah, Mike Dietrich. So it was super interesting. In a time before COVID, it was the 22nd of January, 2020 this year. Our CEO for AstraZeneca, Pascal, announced an Ambition Zero Carbon strategy to eliminate emissions in Scope 1 and 2 by 2025 and a carbon negative value chain across the entire company by 2030. So now we have a decade to deliver. So this, as an environmental scientist, I instantly thought about, okay, how can I, as my site lead, solve this problem? And I'm sure that you've been in similar situations where you've been dropped a challenge or an opportunity, and then you've had to think about that problem and how you would solve it. So in this case, I was like, oh, instantly, let's just electrify. We can get rid of our natural gas. We'll be able to get to zero carbon, PPA, solar or wind energy, easy, easy, easy. Well, we consume so much natural gas that we would override the grid's capacity in our area. So we're like, okay, that's not going to work. And then I'm like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. So then we started looking into renewable natural gas. I don't know how many people have heard of that. It was really new to me as of the beginning of this year. I know that we've had landfill gas, and we're pulling the methane that's coming off of our landfills. And so we started to look into more and more technology and realized that there's something with thermal gasification. So actually taking municipal solid waste and diverting it from going to a landfill. You could also take recyclable materials like plastics. We all have a plastics problem. And so as we were looking into this process, we realized that there's no emissions like a waste, like an waste to energy plant where there's incineration, but there's particulate matter. This plant captures all of the gases and particulates that's coming off. And I was actually on a road trip this summer, staying out in the wilderness, doing a lot of hiking and working from the road since we had that amazing opportunity. And I stopped in a plant in Reno where United is using this process to upscale municipal solid waste into biojet fuel. And we realized like this could be a viable technology for AstraZeneca. And we're looking into numerous other solutions, but just the idea of this is fantastic to me. Landfills right now end up as a very poor land use. It's a very poor land use practice, right? If we're thinking about sustainable development, that material is going to leach into the groundwater at some point in time over the next hundreds or 1,000 years that it sits there. And it's also going to release methane to the atmosphere. So now we have a technology where we can eliminate that entire process and convert all of that material back into methane or ethanol or biodiesel or biojet fuel. We can splice that carbon chain however we want. And there's a whole bunch of conversation around carbon intensity and are you actually carbon zero if you have carbon intensive products and fossil carbon going into it like plastics. My perspective on that is, all right, well, let's be innovative. Let's think outside the box around how we can address all of these concerns, because we couldn't just separate it out for it to be organic waste. But if 20% of it is coming from plastics, we can take 20% of that material, turn it into ethane to turn it back into other plastics. The beauty of all of this is even one of these plants would produce more renewable natural gas than all of AstraZeneca could use, which means in the United States. And so then we would, other corporations or other individuals would be able to purchase renewable natural gas, which means we would not be pulling fossil natural gas out of the ground. So in going down this road of thermal gasification, is it a perfect technology? No. But does it help us manage an issue that we have in our society in a more sustainable way and help us eliminate fossil fuels coming down from and being pulled out of the planet? I think so. I think this solves huge problems. One of the other things that we've been looking at is it doesn't always make sense to build a new building, but because they're so expensive. But current building infrastructure is not as energy efficient as we would like. So often the solution is to knock down a building and build a new building. We've found that looking at insulated metal panels that we can put up on the outside of a lot of the concrete and brick buildings that we have in our inventory and globally, replacing with more energy efficient windows and putting on some sort of a shading device on the southern or western facade, or if you're in the southern hemisphere, reverse that. You can literally half your building EUI. And you can do that in a way where it's 10% of the cost of new construction. So we don't have massive amounts of budgets, but if we start applying innovative, sustainable technologies, we can start reducing that energy that we need in the beginning. And by managing other waste streams or looking at the technologies that are in the marketplace, repurposing older technologies into new applications, we can solve a lot of problems that we have with a lot less cost and infrastructure changes than we could if we were looking at other alternatives. And that is all I got for you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mike Dietrich, for your influential presentation. It is also good to note that AE members' work go beyond climate impact, and it's directly related to multiple sustainable development goals defined by the United Nations. Last but not least, time for our Q&A session. This question is for Ian Boylan. At which point in your career did the flashbulb go off and you realized the impact you were making?
It's a very interesting question. I suppose it's never I don't think it was really a flashbulb that went off. I think it was more something that grew up over time. And it's more when you tend to look back over time, you start to realize it, as opposed to being I don't think there's ever been a single light bulb moment that came out to me.
This question is for Brian Bomer. Much of the US can be internally focused. Who from your organization brings the international codes to the table? Are they energy engineers?
So in my jurisdiction, the codes are actually established at the state level. And when the state adopts a new code cycle, so 2018, for instance, the jurisdictions within the state have several months to make amendments and then adopt them before they're automatically enforced. In the case of the Green Code, that is the one code that isn't part of the state adoption process, and that was really driven by policymakers in our area. So our county council and our county executive, who is essentially the mayor of the county, has pushed very ambitious goals for net zero energy, greenhouse gas reductions, and solar. And so the Green Code is a tool that we've used to implement some of those goals. I think really where the AEE members have an opportunity is supporting different policies like the Green Code or the BEPS program or things like that, where there's opportunities for continuous commissioning, for energy evaluation and energy improvement.
Thank you. This question goes out to Joanne Dean. Okay, so the question goes as, what are the main barriers to develop an ESCO market in developing countries and how to overcome them?
Thank you, Yasmeen. I think in the developing markets, South Africa gives a lot of learning across to the African continent. But the biggest barriers would be your understanding your legislative and your regulatory environment, and then to be able to define a path to implement strategies that would wouldn't say be under the radar, they must be compliant. It's the understanding of that. I think for all South Africans at the moment, it's more of a policy and a regulation as to access to technologies or to solutions. Then the second is for the understanding from the various entities that we'd want to engage. So there needs to be a lot more learning. There needs to be a lot more showcasing of projects. You know, you heard me referring earlier to POCs. So we need collective case studies, and I think this is where platforms like AEE and that can serve to encourage this. And then there has to be a lot of mentorship. There are a lot of people out there. If you think of it in our industry, just when PV panels came out in a small little inverter and you had all these kits, your standard, how can I say, installers, they didn't have a clue. You know what I mean? There was just no guidance. So it's also about the standards and that compliance and understanding the SA Grid Code. So it's in a complex environment, but there should be leaders, and this is where we can make the difference.
Mr. Mike, we have a question for you. We had a federal climate change legislation completely written in 2020. It included a national cap and trade program under Clinton. But even the Democrats abandoned it and never brought it to the floor. Meantime, the value of carbon is still so low that only legislation can encourage GH reductions. Since business is mostly motivated by money, do you think there's only hope in truly valuing these reductions in a substantive way?
Well, I think it's an interesting question. And in 2015, when the Paris Accord was signed, you see a lot of companies started setting energy, water, waste reduction targets over the next 10 years. And the value of AstraZeneca also having one of the most aggressive zero carbon targets in the world, there's also, businesses stepped in to bridge that gap. And the way that I think companies are going to be making money in the future is because the marketplace is looking for corporations that are doing the right thing, are being considerate about their energy, water, waste, and looking at managing carbon and even the supply chain. And people are starting to make selections and even investing only in companies that are doing the right thing. Businesses see that and they're stepping up to the table. I think the Paris Accord, with its statement of the entire world for the first time ever agreed on something, climate change is real and we have to do something about it. Did the Paris Accord do a lot to affect change on a governmental level? No, but it signaled to the marketplace that there's something that the people of the world want. And corporations are moving in that direction. I think AstraZeneca is an example, and there's several other examples, Microsoft, Unilever, all these companies are moving in that direction. Is it enough? Maybe not, but we're starting to move in that direction. And I think businesses have picked up the baton and are actually leading the race when governments are not stepping up to the plate.
Thank you. This question is directed to all of you. Maybe everyone can help answer this. Most of what AE focuses on is energy efficiency and to push to add more renewables to the grid. The electrification of transportation through the rise of electrical vehicles and electrical vehicle charging stations are directly opposite to reducing the energy load. How do we reconcile this? Can you have a net zero building with electrical vehicle charging stations without submetering? Who can help answer this question?
Okay, Yasmeen, I can start it off anyway. The question about the net zero building without submetering is not one that I'll answer myself, but I'll pass that on to somebody else afterwards. But I think one of the areas that a lot of people misinterpret when they talk about electrical vehicles and they're adding loads to the grid, yes, they are adding load to the grid, but they typically add load to the grid at night when people are charging them up typically. And that is the time when the grid is at its lowest power, and often, which means the electrical grid system is inefficient. Adding the load of electrical vehicles to the grid can help to flatten the load curve, and in flatten the load curve, make it more possible to deliver a more energy efficient grid, and also in some ways make it more viable to add renewables to the grid at times. So it does add power to the grid, but it's not inconsistent with energy efficiency and electrical efficiency also. Okay.
I agree with Ian's comment. I think that we have multi-tariff systems across the world, and it's actually to look at where the tariff systems are and where the loads are, because it's not just about shifting the actual, it's the financial shifting as well as the load shifting. And everybody's always focusing on the peaks, but no one's focusing on the valleys. So if we do incorporate the right allocation and the right modeling of storage plus the EV charging, and if you could use your vehicles, I don't know if everybody's considered this, but imagine if you had a fleet of buses that were electrically charged. They've got charged to put back into the grid when they're also idling. So it's very much a combination of give and take to come to a net. And the ancillary service benefits towards the grid are massive. So really, if you can define how you're reducing the losses, it's an astronomical calculation if you do it.
Thanks. I think that's it for today. Thank you, dear speakers, for sharing your stories and inspiring us to fight for a better future. I don't know about you, but as a student, I definitely have more role models to look up to. Thank you all for taking part in our campaign and for appreciating these energy engineers. I'd also like to thank all the AAE team in behind the scenes. And I remind you to keep an eye on AAE's social channels in the coming months for more activity on this subject. Thank you all. Goodbye.